Do-hyun Lee stood at the edge of his garden, watching the twin suns of New Jeju set behind the purple mountains. His old bones felt the evening chill, but he didn't move just yet. After 30 years of military service, he had learned to appreciate these quiet moments. The garden spread out before him was nothing like the automated farms that fed most colonies. Do-hyun grew his vegetables the old way with his hands in the dirt. His neighbors, mostly aliens from different parts of the galaxy, thought this was strange. They didn't understand why a retired commander from the Terran Defense Force would choose to spend his time pulling weeds and watering plants by hand. "Good evening, Commander Lee," a voice called from the road. It was his neighbor, a tall, blue-skinned Meridian named Cax. Like most Meridians, Cax had 4 arms and moved with a smooth grace that made him look like he was floating. "Just Do-hyun now," he corrected gently, turning to face his neighbor. "I haven't been Commander Lee for 2 years. Cax made the whistling sound that passed for laughter among his species. Old titles die hard, especially for one with your record. "Are you still coming to the community meeting tomorrow? We're discussing the recent shipping delays." Do-hyun nodded. He hadn't missed a community meeting since moving to New Jeju. Some habits from his military days stayed with him, like keeping track of everything that happened in his area of operations. Of course, New Jeju wasn't a military operation. It was just a peaceful farming colony at the edge of human space, where retired veterans like him came to live out their final years. "I'll be there," he said. "Have you noticed anything unusual about the delays?" Cax waved one of his 4 hands dismissively. "Just the usual problems with space travel. Some ships arrive late, others early. Nothing to worry about." Do-hyun smiled and nodded, but his mind was already working. In his 30 years of service, he had learned that patterns in shipping delays often meant something was happening behind the scenes. But that was his old life. Now he was just a retired human growing vegetables and practicing his martial arts. Later that evening, as Do-hyun sat at his computer terminal, he looked at the shipping schedules again. His house was simple but comfortable, with a mix of traditional Korean decorations and modern technology. On one wall hung his old officer's sword, and beside it, a digital display showed the local weather and colony news. He pulled up the shipping manifests for the last 6 months. To most people, they would look boring, just lists of arrival times, cargo contents, and destination ports. But to Do-hyun's trained eye, something wasn't right. The delays weren't random. They followed a pattern, one he had seen before, long ago on a mining colony that turned out to be a front for armed smugglers. "You're getting paranoid in your old age," he muttered to himself, but he saved the data anyway. Old habits died hard. The next morning, Do-hyun went through his usual routine. He woke up at dawn, just like he had done every day for the past 30 years. His body might be older now, but he kept it in shape. In his backyard, he had set up a simple training area where he practiced traditional Korean martial arts. As he moved through the familiar forms, his mind stayed sharp. 3 ships had been delayed in the past week. All of them had come from different ports, but they had all stopped at the same refueling station before reaching New Jeju. That could be a coincidence, but in his experience, coincidences were rare. A group of young aliens watched him from the road. To them, he probably looked like a funny old human, moving slowly through ancient fighting forms. They didn't realize that every movement was precise, practiced over decades until it was perfect. They didn't know that his slow, careful exercises could become lightning-fast attacks if needed. But that was fine. Let them think he was just another retired warrior, passing his time with old exercises. Let them see only the vegetables growing in his garden, not the strategic layout that gave him clear lines of sight in all directions. Let them think his daily walks around the colony were just an old man's habit, not careful patrol routes. After his morning exercise, Do-hyun walked to the local cafe. It was run by a human woman named Sunhai, another retired veteran. She had been a logistics officer in the Terran Defense Force, and her coffee shop had the same efficient layout as a military supply depot. The usual: Sun-hee asked as he entered. She was already pouring his green tea. Yes, thank you, Do-hyun said, sitting at his regular table. From here, he could see both the main street and the spaceport in the distance. Have you noticed anything strange about the supply deliveries lately? Sun-hee's hands paused for just a moment as she poured the tea. Now that you mention it, my last 3 shipments of coffee beans were delayed. The shipping company blamed it on solar flare activity, but she left the sentence unfinished. But the solar weather has been calm, Do-hyun finished. They looked at each other, 2 old warriors who had seen too much to believe in coincidences. I'm probably just being paranoid, Sun-hee said, but she pulled out her tablet and showed him her delivery schedules. The patterns matched what Do-hyun had seen in the main colony shipping logs. As they talked, more morning customers came into the cafe. Most were aliens heading to work in the colony's administrative offices or the spaceport. They nodded politely to Do-hyun and Sun-hee, seeing only 2 elderly humans sharing tea and chatting about old times. Do-hyun spent the rest of the morning in his garden. His vegetables were growing well, tomatoes, peppers, and Korean greens that reminded him of Earth. As he worked, he watched the ships landing and taking off from the spaceport. There was something wrong with the patterns there too, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. At midday, he walked to the community center for the meeting about the shipping delays. The room was full of aliens and a few humans, all talking about how the delays were affecting their businesses. Do-hyun sat quietly in the back, listening. The colony administrator, a tall Centaurian named Vex, explained that everything was under control. The delays were normal, nothing to worry about. But Do-hyun noticed how Vex's antenna twitched when someone asked about the refueling station, where all the delayed ships had stopped. After the meeting, Do-hyun took a different route home. This path took him past the colony's communication center, where all off-world messages were processed. As he walked, he counted the security cameras. There were fewer than there should be, and some of them were pointed in strange directions. At home, he spent the afternoon working in his garden again, but this time he was planting something new, small sensor devices that looked exactly like garden markers. They would track any unusual movement or electronic signals in the area. It wasn't paranoia if your instincts had kept you alive through 3 major conflicts and dozens of smaller ones. That evening, as Do-hyun prepared his dinner, his computer terminal beeped. One of his old military contacts had replied to his message about the shipping patterns. The response was short. Similar delays reported in Sector 7. Watch your back, old friend. Sector 7 was 2 systems away, but it was on the same shipping route as New Jeju. Do-hyun looked out his window at the peaceful colony streets. Everything looked normal, but he had learned long ago that normal was often the best disguise for trouble. He went to bed early, but he didn't sleep much. His mind was too busy processing everything he had seen and heard. The shipping delays, the strange patterns of the spaceport, the misaligned security cameras, the administrator's twitching antenna. They all meant something. He just had to figure out what. In the middle of the night, one of his garden sensors sent an alert to his tablet. Something had triggered it. A signal burst that didn't match any known colony communications. Do-hyun got up and looked out his window. But the street was empty. Whatever had sent the signal was gone now. He spent the rest of the night at his computer, looking through more shipping manifests and colony records. To anyone watching, he would have looked like a restless old man passing time with boring paperwork. They wouldn't have known that his military implants were still active, recording everything he saw and analyzing patterns that most people wouldn't notice. As dawn approached, Do-hyun finally found what he was looking for. It wasn't just the delays that were suspicious. It was the cargo manifests themselves. Small discrepancies in the numbers, tiny variations in the routing codes, strange patterns in the delivery schedules. To most people, they would mean nothing. But to someone who had spent decades tracking insurgent supply lines and smuggling operations, they told a clear story. Something was happening on New Jeju, something hidden behind the peaceful facade of a retirement colony. and now Do-hyun had to decide what to do about it. He was retired after all. These problems belonged to younger people now. But as he watched the twin suns rise over his garden, Do-hyun smiled. He had something now that he never had during his active service. Time. Time to watch, time to plan, time to think through every possibility. And maybe, just maybe, that made him more dangerous than ever. He started his morning exercises as usual, but today each movement had new purpose. His garden would need a few modifications. Nothing obvious, just some strategic relocations of his vegetable beds, some new sensor placements disguised as irrigation improvements. And perhaps it was time to invite some other retired veterans over for tea and conversation about old times. After all, he wasn't the only one on New Jeju with decades of experience and too much free time on their hands. Ha-yeon Park didn't expect much excitement when she took the job as New Jeju's assistant colonial administrator. Fresh out of the Colonial Service Academy, she thought a quiet farming colony would be an easy first assignment. That changed the morning she found herself staring at a computer screen full of equipment failure reports. "This is the third malfunction this week," she said to herself, scrolling through the data. The colony's maintenance systems were showing strange errors. Nothing dangerous, just small things. A security camera would stop working for an hour. A cargo scanner would give wrong readings. A communication relay would lose signal for a few minutes. She sat in her small office near the spaceport, surrounded by screens showing colony data. Outside her window, ships came and went as usual. Everything looked normal, but something felt wrong. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. The door opened to reveal an elderly human man. Ha-yeon recognized him from the community meetings. Do-hyun Lee, the retired military commander who grew vegetables. "Miss Park," he said, bowing slightly in the traditional Korean way. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," she said, returning the bow. "What can I help you with?" Do-hyun sat down carefully, like someone who knew his joints weren't as young as they used to be. "I noticed some strange things in the colony's maintenance logs. I thought you might want to know about them." Ha-yeon leaned forward. She hadn't told anyone about the equipment problems yet. "What kind of strange things?" "The pattern of failures," he said. "They're not random. They follow a sequence I've seen before, long ago." Before Ha-yeon could ask more questions, her computer beeped. Another equipment failure. This time, a loader robot at the spaceport had stopped working. "Excuse me," she said, standing up. "I need to check this." "I'll come with you," Do-hyun said, "if you don't mind. I enjoy walks around the spaceport." At the spaceport, they found the loader robot frozen in place. A maintenance worker, a green-skinned Verdian with 6 eyes, was trying to restart it. "Third one this week," the Verdian grumbled. "Must be a virus in the system." Do-hyun walked around the robot slowly, his eyes taking in every detail. Ha-yeon watched him, wondering what a retired commander saw that others might miss. "Miss Park," he said quietly, "would you like to meet some friends of mine? They might have interesting thoughts about these problems." That afternoon, Ha-yeon found herself in a small house on the edge of the colony. The house belonged to Jae-ho Kim, a retired combat engineer who now spent his time building model ships and tending a small garden. Inside, she met Mi-rae Kang, a former special operations officer who had retired to New Jeju 2 years ago. Mi-rae's living room was full of small drones. She raced them for fun, she explained. "The equipment failures aren't accidents," Jae-ho said, serving tea in old Earth-style cups. "Someone's testing our systems, looking for weaknesses." "But why?" Ha-yeon asked. "We're just a farming colony." Mi-rae smiled. "That's what makes it perfect. No one expects trouble here. Everyone sees what they want to see. Just a bunch of old humans enjoying their retirement, and young aliens going about their business." Ha-yeon looked at the 3 retired warriors. They seemed so ordinary: an old gardener, a model shipbuilder, and a drone racing enthusiast. but their eyes were sharp and their minds were clearly still as quick as ever. "Watch this," Mayray said, turning on a screen. It showed footage from one of her racing drones. "I was practicing near the spaceport yesterday." The footage showed a cargo ship landing. Nothing seemed unusual at first, but then Jeho pointed to something. "See how the cargo containers are being unloaded? The weight distribution is wrong. They're lighter than they should be. Or heavier," Do-hyun added. "Perfect way to smuggle things in or out of the colony." Hae-yun felt a chill. She had studied colony administration, learned about security protocols and emergency procedures. But these retired warriors saw things differently. They noticed small details, patterns that most people would miss. "The maintenance problems are tests," Jeho explained, pulling out some diagrams he had made. "Someone's mapping our security systems, learning how we respond to failures. Like scanning a building's defenses before a break-in," Mayray added. She was working on one of her drones as she talked, but her eyes were alert and focused. "But who would want to break into New Jeju?" Hae-yun asked. "We don't have anything valuable." "We have location," Do-hyun said. "We're close to 3 major trade routes. Perfect spot for pirates or smugglers to set up a base. But first, they need to know our weaknesses." Hae-yun looked at her computer tablet, at all the maintenance reports she had been studying. Suddenly, they didn't look like random failures anymore. They looked like pieces of a puzzle these retired warriors had seen before. "What should we do?" she asked. "Should I report this to colonial security?" The 3 veterans exchanged looks. "Not yet," Do-hyun said. "We don't have proof, just suspicions. And if we're right, warning them might make things worse." "Besides," Mayray added with a smile, "we have something better than colonial security. We have time, experience, and hobbies that no one takes seriously." Jeho nodded, pointing to his model ships. "People see an old man playing with toys. They don't realize I'm using them to track ship movements and calculate cargo weights." Mayray picked up one of her racing drones. "Everyone thinks I'm just having fun. They don't notice that my drones record everything they see during races. And my garden," Do-hyun added, "gives me a perfect reason to walk around the colony, watching everything." Hae-yun looked at these retired warriors with new respect. They weren't just passing time with hobbies. They were maintaining surveillance, gathering intelligence, staying sharp. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Keep doing your job," Do-hyun said. "Watch the maintenance reports, but now you'll know what to look for. And maybe, if you have time, you could visit my garden sometimes. An old man always appreciates company while he's working." Hae-yun understood. The garden visits would be their cover for sharing information. "I'd like that," she said. "I've always wanted to learn about traditional earth farming." As she left Jeho's house that evening, Hae-yun looked at New Jeju with different eyes. The peaceful farming colony didn't seem so simple anymore. Behind the quiet facade, old warriors were watching, thinking, planning. Their bodies might be older, but their minds were as sharp as ever. And they had something now that they never had during their active service: time. Time to observe, time to think, time to plan. No urgent missions, no immediate deadlines. Just patient, careful observation and planning. Walking home, Hae-yun smiled to herself. Anyone planning trouble in New Jeju was making a big mistake. They thought they were dealing with a simple farming colony, protected only by basic security systems and inexperienced administrators like her. They didn't realize that their every move was being watched by retired warriors who had spent decades fighting battles and solving problems. Warriors who now had all the time in the world to get creative with their solutions. Hae-yun reached her office and looked at the maintenance reports again. Now she saw them differently, not as problems to fix, but as pieces of evidence in a larger game. A game where her best allies were 3 elderly humans who everyone else saw as harmless retirees. She opened a new file on her computer and began organizing the maintenance reports in a different way, looking for the patterns Do-hyun had mentioned. Outside her window, the twin suns were setting. painting the sky in purple and orange. Somewhere in the colony, Jai-ho was working on his model ships. Mi-rae was flying her drones, and Do-hyun was tending his garden. They looked like ordinary retirees enjoying their hobbies, and that, Hae-yeon now understood, was their greatest strength. 3 weeks after Hae-yeon Park discovered the equipment problems, Mi-rae Kang's racing drone caught something interesting. She was practicing for the upcoming colony drone race when her camera picked up unusual activity at an abandoned storage facility. Mi-rae sat in her small workshop, reviewing the footage. Her hands, still steady after years of special operations work, adjusted the video controls. The footage showed 3 figures moving equipment into the facility late at night. They thought they were being careful. They didn't know that an old woman's racing hobby would catch them. She sent a message to Do-hyun and Ji-ho. Tea time. 30 minutes later, they gathered in her workshop. Hae-yeon joined them, bringing fresh data from the colony systems. They had started calling these meetings tea time, and to anyone watching, they looked like elderly friends sharing stories over drinks. "Watch this," Mi-rae said, playing the drone footage. "They're using the old storage units, the ones that were supposed to be empty." Jai-ho studied the video carefully. "Those containers they're moving. They match the ones from the suspicious shipments we've been tracking." "There's more," Hae-yeon said, showing them her tablet. "I checked the power usage records. That facility is using energy, but officially it's listed as inactive." Do-hyun nodded slowly. "They're setting up an operation, using our colony as a base. But for what?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Sun-hye, the cafe owner, sent them a message that evening. A group of rough-looking aliens had come to her cafe. They tried to be quiet, but her old military implants could still pick up fragments of their conversation. They mentioned the Crimson Syndicate. Sun-hye reported when they met at her cafe after closing time. "I haven't heard that name in 20 years, not since the Perseus sector raids." Do-hyun's face turned serious. The Crimson Syndicate was one of the most dangerous pirate groups in the galaxy. They were smart, well-organized, and ruthless. They didn't just raid ships, they took over whole colonies to use as bases. "We need proof," Mi-rae said. "Real evidence we can take to colonial security." Jai-ho smiled, picking up one of his model ships. "I think I can help with that. These aren't just models, they have sensors built in. Give me a week to plant them around the storage facility." Over the next few days, they gathered evidence carefully. Mi-rae's racing drones mapped the facility from above. Ji-ho's model ships recorded signal traffic and energy readings. Do-hyun's garden sensors tracked movement patterns. Hae-yeon collected data from the colony systems, looking for more signs of the Syndicate's activities. They learned that the Crimson Syndicate had chosen New Jeju carefully. The colony was perfect for their needs, close to major trade routes but far from major military bases. They had spent months setting up their operation, hiding their activities behind false shipping manifests and equipment malfunctions. "They think we're harmless," Mi-rae said during one of their team meetings. "Just some old humans and young administrators who won't notice what they're doing." "That's their mistake," Jai-ho added. "They don't realize that retired warriors are the most dangerous kind. We have nothing but time to watch and plan." Hae-yeon looked at her older friends with admiration. In the Colonial Service Academy, she had learned about security protocols and emergency procedures. But these retired warriors taught her something different: the value of patience, observation, and creative thinking. One evening, as they reviewed their evidence, they discovered something alarming. Ji-ho's sensors had picked up weapons signatures from the storage facility. The Crimson Syndicate wasn't just using New Jeju as a base. They were stockpiling weapons. "This is bigger than we thought," Do-hyun said. "They're not just setting up a base. They're preparing for something larger." Mi-rae analyzed the weapon signatures: military-grade plasma rifles, shield generators, even some old Terran Defense Force equipment. They're building an arsenal. "But why here?" Hae-yeon asked. Why risk storing weapons on a colony world? Because no one would expect it, Jaiho explained. Think about it. What's the first thing you think of when you hear farming colony? Peaceful, quiet, harmless, Hei-yun answered. Exactly, Du-hyun said. The perfect cover for something dangerous. Just like how no one suspects retired warriors of being a threat. They spent the next few days gathering more evidence. Mei modified her racing drones, adding better sensors and cameras. Jaiho planted more model ships around the colony, creating a network of surveillance devices disguised as an old man's hobby collection. Do-hyun expanded his garden, adding new sensor arrays hidden among the vegetables. He also started inviting other retired veterans to his garden for what looked like farming lessons. In reality, he was building a network of experienced observers. Hei-yun provided cover for their activities, using her position in the colonial administration to access records and divert attention from their surveillance. She learned to hide important information in routine reports, using coding techniques the veterans taught her. One night, Mei-ray's drones caught something crucial. A large ship landed at the spaceport, officially carrying farming equipment, but the thermal signatures showed something very different inside the cargo containers. More weapons, Jaiho confirmed, checking the readings from his model ships. And something else. Look at these power readings. They're setting up a command center. The equipment malfunctions, Hei-yun realized. They weren't just testing our security. They were installing their own systems, hiding them inside our colony's infrastructure. Do-hyun studied all the evidence they had gathered. After 30 years of military service, he knew what these signs meant. The Crimson Syndicate wasn't just smuggling weapons through New Jeju. They were preparing to take over the colony. We need to act soon, he said, but we need to be smart about it. They've spent months setting this up. We need to make sure our response is perfect. Mei-ray nodded, working on one of her drones. They think they're being clever, hiding behind shipping manifests and equipment failures. They don't realize they're being watched by people who spent decades fighting smarter enemies than them. And now we have something we never had in active service, Jaiho added, adjusting the sensors on his model ships. We have time to plan everything carefully. No rushed decisions, no emergency responses. Hei-yun looked at the evidence they had gathered. Drone footage, sensor readings, shipping records, power usage data. Everything pointed to a massive operation by the Crimson Syndicate. They were using New Jeju's peaceful reputation as cover for something dangerous. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had ignored the retired warriors living in the colony. They had dismissed them as harmless elderly humans passing time with their hobbies. As the group planned their next moves, Hei-yun realized something important. These retired warriors weren't just experienced. They were patient. They had spent weeks gathering evidence, building their case piece by piece. They weren't rushing to act, weren't letting anxiety or fear drive their decisions. They had time, and they knew how to use it. Every day, they added more pieces to their puzzle, gathered more evidence, refined their plans. Their hobbies, drone racing, model ships, gardening, had become perfect covers for a sophisticated surveillance operation. The Crimson Syndicate thought they were being careful. They thought they had chosen the perfect hiding place. They didn't realize that every move they made was being watched by people who had spent their lives fighting threats just like them. And now these retired warriors had something even more valuable than their experience. They had time to get creative. Do-hyun's garden had changed. To most people, it still looked like a simple vegetable plot, but now every plant served a purpose. He had planted tall sunflowers that blocked security cameras' views at specific angles. His irrigation system could now flood certain areas of the colony within minutes. One morning, he stood in his garden with Jaiho and Mei-ray, planning their next steps. Hei-yun joined them, bringing breakfast from Sunhee's cafe. The syndicate is getting bolder, Hei-yun said, showing them her tablet. 3 more weapon shipments arrived last night, hidden in farming equipment. They think they're being clever, Mei-ray said, working on one of her racing drones. She had modified all 12 of her drones now. They looked the same on the outside, but inside they carried advanced scanning equipment and signal jammers. Jaiho spread out his latest project on Do-hyun's garden table. It looked like a detailed model of the colony spaceport, perfect in every detail. But hidden inside each tiny building were sensors and monitoring devices. "We can't fight them directly," Do-hyun said, pouring tea for everyone. "They have weapons, younger fighters, and probably combat robots. But we have something better." "Experience," Mayray said. "Time," added Jaiho. "And they don't expect anything from us," Haehyun finished. Over the next week, they put their plans into action. Every day, Do-hyun taught martial arts classes in the colony's community center. More retired veterans joined his classes. They practiced slow, careful movements that looked like simple exercises. But each movement had a purpose. Each stance was chosen carefully. Mayray entered the biggest drone race of the year. Her modified drones flew complex patterns around the colony, mapping every building, every street, every hidden corner. The syndicate members watched the race like everyone else, not realizing they were being scanned and recorded. Jaiho started a model building club. Soon, detailed models of colony buildings appeared in shop windows and public spaces. Each model contained hidden sensors, creating a network of surveillance devices across the colony. Haehyun used her position in the colonial administration to help their plans. She scheduled maintenance work that forced the syndicate to change their routines. She adjusted security patrols to gather more information about their activities. Sunhee's Cafe became their command center. The retired veterans gathered there each morning, sharing news and drinking coffee. To anyone watching, they looked like elderly friends enjoying their retirement. They didn't notice how information passed between tables, hidden in casual conversations about gardening and weather. One evening, Do-hyun showed them his latest garden project. He had created a new irrigation system that could flood specific areas of the colony within minutes. "Water and electronics don't mix well," he said with a smile. Mayray had finished upgrading her racing drones. "They can interfere with communications now," she explained, "and record everything they see. The syndicate will think it's just interference from the racing circuits." Jaiho's models now covered most of the colony. Each one contained tiny sensors and transmitters. "We can track their movements everywhere," he said, "and they think they're just decorations." Haehyun brought more concerning news. "The syndicate is planning something big," she said. "Their weapon shipments have increased. They're bringing in more people too, hiding them in cargo containers." "They'll move soon," Do-hyun said, "probably when they think they have enough weapons and fighters in place." "But we'll be ready," Mayray said, checking her drone controls. "Every move they make, we'll know about it." They spent the next few days preparing. Do-hyun's martial arts students learned new techniques, disguised as traditional forms. Each movement was designed to disable security systems or block access to important areas. Mayray's drones flew more practice runs, recording detailed scans of the colony. She taught other retired veterans to fly drones too, building a network of observers in the sky. Jaiho added more sensors to his models, focusing on the areas where the syndicate was most active. His model building club grew larger, giving him more eyes and ears around the colony. Haehyun coordinated everything from her office, hiding their preparations in routine colonial administration. She created maintenance schedules that would help their plans and moved security patrols to protect their assets. One morning, Do-hyun noticed something different in the syndicate's patterns. They were moving equipment more quickly now, bringing in more weapons. Their hidden fighters were gathering in specific locations. "They're getting ready," he told the others during their daily tea meeting. "We need to finish our preparations." Mayray launched her drones on a final practice run. They mapped every detail of the colony, every hiding place the syndicate used. Her fellow drone racers were ready too, their modified drones carrying jammers and scanners. Jaiho's models were all in place now. Tiny sensors hidden in perfect replicas of colony buildings tracked every movement, every signal, every power surge. His model building club members watched carefully, reporting anything unusual. Hei-yun prepared the colony systems. She had hidden programs ready to disrupt communications, control security doors, and manage power distribution. Everything looked normal in the computer logs, but she could activate her changes with a single command. Do-hyun walked through his garden one last time. Every plant, every path, every irrigation pipe had a purpose. His students were ready too, their slow martial arts movements hiding quick, precise actions that could disable enemies and protect crucial areas. "We're not soldiers anymore," he told the others. "We're not supposed to fight their battles. But we have something they don't understand." "Patience," Mayray said, checking her drone controls one final time. "Experience," Jai-ho added, adjusting the sensors in his latest model. "And time to think," Hei-yun finished, reviewing her computer systems. They gathered in Sunhee's cafe that evening, drinking tea and sharing stories like they did every day. Around them, other retired veterans sat at their usual tables, looking peaceful and harmless. But under the peaceful surface, everything was ready. Do-hyun's garden could flood key areas in minutes. Mayray's drones could blind security systems and block communications. Jai-ho's models could track every movement in the colony. Hei-yun's computer programs could control colony systems. The Crimson Syndicate thought they were being clever, hiding their operations in a peaceful farming colony. They thought the elderly human residents were no threat, just retired warriors passing time with their hobbies. They didn't realize that these retired warriors had spent decades fighting battles and solving problems. They didn't understand that retirement had given these veterans something precious: time to plan, time to prepare, time to think through every possibility. The Syndicate was about to learn an important lesson. Retired warriors weren't less dangerous. They were more dangerous because now they had time to get creative. And they had used that time well. As night fell over New Jeju, Do-hyun looked out his window at the peaceful colony streets. Everything looked normal, but he knew better. Behind the calm surface, a network of sensors, cameras, and monitoring devices watched every move. Retired veterans waited patiently, their peaceful hobbies hiding careful preparations. The Syndicate would make their move soon. And when they did, they would find out what happened when you gave experienced warriors too much free time to plan. The Crimson Syndicate made their move on a quiet morning when the twin suns of New Jeju were just rising. They thought they had chosen the perfect time. They were wrong. Do-hyun was already in his garden, tending to his plants. He saw the first signs of movement through his carefully placed security sensors. Armed figures were moving toward the spaceport, using the early morning shadows for cover. He sent a simple message to the others: "It's time." In her apartment, Mayray activated her racing drones. All 12 of them lifted off silently, spreading out across the colony. They looked like they were preparing for an early morning practice run. The Syndicate's guards paid no attention to them. Jai-ho sat in his workshop, surrounded by his model ships and buildings. Each tiny replica now showed him exactly what was happening in the real colony. He watched as red dots appeared on his displays, showing the positions of armed Syndicate members. Hei-yun was already at her office in the Colonial Administration Building. Her computer screen showed normal morning data, but hidden programs were ready to activate at her command. The Syndicate's plan was simple and direct. Their fighters emerged from hiding places around the colony, moving quickly to take control of key locations. They had weapons, combat robots, and careful plans. But they didn't know they were walking into a trap 3 weeks in the making. The first problem they encountered seemed like bad luck. The colony's automated doors started malfunctioning, trapping groups of their fighters in different sections. Hei-yun's hidden programs were working perfectly. When they tried to use their communications devices to coordinate, they found their signals blocked by interference. They didn't realize that Mayray's racing drones, circling overhead in familiar practice patterns, were jamming their frequencies. Some Syndicate members tried to use the back alleys between buildings to move around. They found these routes mysteriously flooded with water from Duhyun's irrigation system. Their electronic weapons and combat robots didn't work well in the water. The Syndicate's leaders, watching from their hidden command center, couldn't understand what was happening. Their carefully planned operation was falling apart, but they couldn't see any obvious resistance, just normal morning activities. Drones practicing, old men in their gardens, maintenance systems running their cycles. They tried to activate their hidden weapons caches around the colony. But Jaiho's model ships and buildings have been monitoring these locations for weeks. Colonial security officers, quietly alerted by Haeyun, had already removed the weapons and replaced them with harmless replicas. The Syndicate fighters who made it to the spaceport found another surprise. Duhyun's martial arts students, retired veterans all, were there for their morning practice. Their slow, peaceful exercises suddenly became swift, precise movements that disabled security systems and blocked access to crucial areas. In Sunhee's cafe, retired veterans sat drinking their morning coffee. They looked calm and peaceful, but each one was monitoring different parts of the operation through old military implants that the Syndicate hadn't known about. Mei Rei's drone racing friends launched their own modified drones, filling the sky with devices that looked harmless but carried sensors and jammers. The colony's airspace was completely under their control. The Syndicate tried to call for help from their hidden ships in orbit, but Jaiho's sensor network, disguised as hobby models, detected the signals and blocked them. They were trapped in the colony they had planned to capture. Haeyun watched from her office as the Syndicate's operation fell apart. Everything that could go wrong for them was going wrong. Equipment failures, communication problems, blocked routes, missing weapons, all looking like bad luck and coincidence. The Syndicate's leaders finally realized something was wrong when their command center's power failed. They tried to switch to backup systems, but those failed too. They didn't know that every piece of equipment they had smuggled into the colony had been found, marked, and monitored by Jaiho's hidden sensors. Do-hyun walked calmly through his garden, adjusting water flows, and watching through his sensors as confused Syndicate fighters found themselves trapped or redirected by the colony systems. 3 weeks of careful preparation were paying off perfectly. Colonial security forces arrived to find most of their work already done. The Syndicate's fighters were scattered, their weapons disabled, their communications blocked. What should have been a dangerous battle became a simple cleanup operation. The Syndicate's leaders were found in their command center, surrounded by useless equipment. They couldn't understand how their perfect plan had failed. They had been so careful, had planned for every normal security measure. But they hadn't planned for retired warriors with too much free time. They hadn't expected garden irrigation systems that could flood strategic areas, or racing drones that could jam communications, or model ships that could track their every move. Most importantly, they hadn't understood that retirement made these warriors more dangerous, not less. These veterans had decades of experience and all the time they needed to plan their response. No rush, no pressure, just careful preparation hidden behind peaceful hobbies. Haeyun gathered with the others in Sunhee's cafe after everything was over. Colonial security teams were still processing arrested Syndicate members. The colony was safe, and no one had been seriously hurt. They never saw it coming, Mei Rei said, controlling her drones to land one by one. They thought we were just harmless old people with hobbies. Jaiho nodded, looking at his models that had helped track and trap the invaders. They didn't understand that having time makes all the difference. We didn't have to rush our plans or take unnecessary risks. Do-hyun smiled, sipping his tea. In all my years of service, I never had the luxury of time like this. Being retired doesn't mean we're harmless. It means we have time to think, to plan, to get creative. Haeyun looked at her older friends with deep respect. They had protected the colony not with force or violence, but with patience, experience, and creativity. Their peaceful hobbies had become perfect tools for defense. The news spread quickly through the galaxy. The Crimson Syndicate, one of the most dangerous pirate groups in space, had been defeated not by military forces or advanced security systems, but by retired warriors using gardening tools, racing drones, and model ships. Other colonies started paying more attention to their retired veterans after that. They realized that these elderly humans with their peaceful hobbies weren't just passing time. They were maintaining their skills, staying sharp, watching everything around them. Because retired warriors weren't less dangerous, they were more dangerous, because now they had time to get creative. And as the Crimson Syndicate learned, that made all the difference. Life on New Jeju returned to normal. Do-hyun still tended his garden, Mei still raced her drones, and Jiho still built his models. But now everyone understood that these weren't just hobbies. They were reminders that the most dangerous warriors weren't always the ones in uniform. Sometimes, they were the ones with gardens, model ships, and racing drones. The ones who had time to watch, to think, and to plan. The ones who had learned that patience and creativity could be more powerful than any weapon. And if anyone else ever thought about causing trouble on New Jeju, they would have to deal with a group of retired warriors who had nothing but time to prepare for them.